In terms of Amazon, I mean, it's the everything store, right? And I think this tech gives that everything store a come inside button. Now we can better understand products in 3D. We can have a more experiential shopping experience. Amazon is already creating maybe more 3D models than anyone in the world right now.
This episode is sponsored by Safe, the account abstraction leader on Ethereum. All right, Gen C, episode 79. Avery, happy Friday when we're recording this today, and it's so lovely to see you. Exciting weekends planned?
Very exciting weekend plans. My little niece is turning 1, so we're going to get to spend some time with her. How about you, Sam?
Also, have a bunch of things going on. I mean, there's a big basketball game tonight, so really that's the only thing I'm
Right.
paying attention to.
Go
But by the
Knicks.
time this airs, I'm sure we'll be victorious. And other than that, just really getting ready for consensus. I'm also heading to Montreal for a minute to speak on something, and then yeah, we're making things happen. A lot of interesting stuff happening in the world these days, Avery. But almost nothing more interesting this week than the announcement and rollout of ChatGPT 4.0. I wanted to get your thoughts for so many reasons. But just the first is what did you think of the updates they were giving? Anything that really sort of piqued your interest as something that you are particularly interested in or particularly scared of?
Yeah, well, for one, OpenAI announced this a day before Google announced their AI updates, which is, of course, just that little arms race that we're seeing. I feel like Sam Altman is pushing his team, like, just be one step ahead of them, one step ahead of them. And it's really interesting to see these two companies take such a different approach to sort of bringing their large language models to the broader public. So it's giving like Silicon Valley, the TV show, where I forget, it was like Hulu and some
Mm-hmm.
other fake company. It's totally giving those vibes. And they're like jabbing at each other on X and like the whole thing. That's been very interesting for me to experience and then sort of to compare and contrast. I think like the speed of these advancements is really impressive. Like there's no way you can see some of these demo videos and not be impressed. And I think it's moving from this place where we are now, where it's like churn tasks, sort of repeatable things, to like really being able to have like critical thinking, combine multiple data points to have, I don't want to say an original thought, but to have like a thought that brings those things together. So really interesting, somewhat scary. What were your takes?
A couple things. I totally agree because I thought it was really interesting. Sam Altman put up that post, which was comparing the set.
The interiors,
Right,
right? Yeah,
exactly. The
the set.
interiors of each company. And I was like, oh, one is trying to be homey and the other one is trying to be corporate,
I
overlord.
didn't think that was trying to be corporate. That was just so Google and having worked at Google for many years.
Yeah.
That's how they design things. They all look like this like weird playground of like, and by the way, I think that's a very strategic thing because it's like scary that, the amount of data they have, but then they're like, it's primary colors.
Right.
Yay.
No, that's very true. The things that I thought were interesting about the 4.0 announcement were three specific things. One was, I totally agree with you. The speed of innovation here is a bit staggering, and it makes me wonder how much they are still holding back. My guess is there's a lot more, but they are only like, let's release this at the cadence that we are comfortable with. Number two was the personality. So the idea, there's a bunch of videos where you can say, ChatGPT, like speak with more drama in your voice, sing your answers, do all these things. There's one where like it almost feels like the AI is flirting with the person asking its questions, and it really gets us closer to that idea of what we saw in the movie Her, which Sam Altman also literally tweeted Her during this. But also it made me think, because you and I have spoken now a couple of different times about the humane pin and the rabbit pin and all these peripherals that are these AI sort of generated additional sort of hardware units. And it really makes all of those feel obsolete already because they're already bringing so much personality and so much assistance, if you will, to the mix. One thing that Sam Altman said, I think it was on the All In podcast last week, was we all think of AI as being an assistant. He's like, I want AI to actually be an employee that is actually pushing back when I have a bad idea. And so thinking about it through that lens, when you're infusing this with personality, the way that it's showing it can do, I thought that was pretty fascinating. The third thing for me was the idea that you can now turn camera on and have it either look at you or look at something you're looking at or show it a math problem, and it can decipher what's going on there. It really takes computer vision to a level that I hadn't seen computer vision before, which is when we think of the thousands and thousands of cameras that are involved in every city around us, every airport, every place we go, plus the cameras in our phones. When you start to think of what that massive visual grid could look like and the processing that could be done on it, that's where I get actually really like inspired, but also very scared, because all of our lives are always being documented. And if the machines know what and can interpret what that is, that sort of starts to get my my goosebumps up.
On the computer vision thing, I think that's really interesting as well. However, those demo videos always look amazing, and then the reality has never come close. We've seen other videos like that. You just brought up the humane pin. When we saw that demo video, we're like, whoa, look at this. And then if you've read any of the reviews, you've seen that it actually isn't easy to set up and it isn't really that easy to use. So while this is like very impressive from a demo perspective, you know me, I always want to see how it actually plays out. And just in my sort of personal life and my, responsibilities for Latin America, I think the translation aspect is like so key, because Google
Love that.
Translate
Yeah.
is, it's okay, but there's sometimes things that like it gets wrong or gets mixed up. And I think that the translation aspect really also helps solve like real barriers for people who, don't share a common language.
Totally agree. That's such a good point. I actually, right after that video, I launched ChatGPT. I connected the headphones to it, and I started to say, listen to me talk in Spanish and tell me what I'm saying. And it was able to do that. Not that my Spanish is very good. And then I started asking it to teach me things in Spanish, and then listen to see if I was getting it. And it's sort of, I don't think I'm using the version they're using, but
Right.
it was a
I don't
way I
think so
didn't
either.
think of using this. That's like, oh, I could actually have a basic conversation and it could tell me when I'm wrong. So I totally agree. Very impressive.
It's pretty outstanding. And like, you think about things like a Spanish tutor, for example, and like maybe you're a person who can't afford to have, a personal human tutor because it's expensive. And this maybe opens that up for you for the low price of like $21 a month. I think some of the feature set on this is really incredible, and people are just scratching the surface. As you're saying, they're discovering these new use cases, and some of that is sort of prompted in the menu bar when you're navigating on their site, and they keep adding to that of like, okay, great, like you can do data analysis and you can do visuals generation. And I personally play around with it a lot. I'm like, I didn't even know I could do that. So I will have to also try practicing my Spanish on GPT 4.0.
Well, not only that, though, I mean, you're doing this podcast with AirPods in, right? AirPods have a
Exactly.
mics and speakers right in your ear. When you're in Latin America, the idea that it could be real-time translation, like we can see where this is going to go. And I think it's pretty exciting in that respect.
Absolutely. And in my job as like a, corporate person, like, cool, I can get a little more efficient, and like that's great for our bottom line and our, marketing efforts. But I think about someone who's like a doctor who's visiting a place where there isn't a shared common language, and like the Doctors Without Borders types of programs. And like that really starts to get interesting from a perspective of like improving humanity, because, I think it's 66% of the world's online content is in English, yet, of course, like only 15% of the world speaks English. So I think about how this can open up a whole world of possibilities for people who actually need this type of thing a lot more than they do in Silicon Valley. But they are coming up with this stuff in Silicon Valley, so we have to give them some props. So what did you think of the Google one?
The Google one felt very Google to me. I don't sleep on Google's ability to do this stuff really well. I think that they are going to be one of the dominant players here. I think that they have the reach, they have the distribution platforms, they have the access into all of our lives because we use these Google apps. So while I think they are being more reserved in what they're working on, and frankly have not had as good rollout, I think in the long run, Google becomes in the top two, if not the top player in this game. In the same way that I don't sleep on Facebook either. I think
Right.
what they're doing with like their Open Llama models and how much those are powering a lot of stuff. I think there's just so much happening here. We should not discount it. I will say, and I want to just kind of make a quick bridge to our next story, is
Mm-hmm.
I am worried again about all of this and the idea of the opportunity to utilize these things to create misinformation. I sent you a link for something called the Get Bad News app that we'll put in the show notes. And this is an app that is actually created by a university. But the idea is it kind of shows you how easy it is to be an agent of chaos in a misinformation world. You kind of launch the app. It says like, do you want to apply for the job as misinformation agent? You're like, yes. And then it kind of asks you these topics, and you kind of go through this decision tree. And then it just shows you like, okay, now here's the tweets we're going to make. Here's the fake articles we're going to make. Here's all of the stuff. And then as you're doing, your reputational score goes up as an agent of chaos, as an agent of misinformation. So to me, it was actually like a really interesting little game that one can play to see how quickly this stuff can become nefarious if we don't watch it. And I don't still know how the Googles and the OpenAIs and the Facebooks are really able to protect us yet, because they want something that everyone can use. And some people are just going to use it for bad things. So like, what's your take on when looking at these models through the lens of sort of the opportunities for misinformation?
Yeah. For one, this website, everyone who's listening to this podcast should definitely check it out. This getbadnews.com. It just shows you like in real time how easy it is to sort of spiral. It has this little kind of ticker that shows your growing followers as you spread misinformation. It's actually a really apt time for this conversation because this week we had a really sophisticated like phishing and cyber attack on like some of our ad accounts. And I know that sounds like, oh, like what's the big deal? We have like every which like security and authenticator app and like all of that. And like there are really sophisticated bad actors who basically hack into these ad accounts and change over the ad sets to like drive to products that like are sold on Temu and things like that. So this is very top of mind for me of this idea of like online bad actors being really sophisticated and able to hack into like systems that are very well protected that have massive billion-dollar like lines of credit and things like that. In this particular case, it's, you know, it makes sense to me. It's also when people like, you know, whenever you think about what goes like viral, it's not something that's, we're always trying at Vayner to make positivity louder. And we say that because so much of what is loud is negative, is the scary, is the headlines, is the sort of shock value effect. So we should make our own website called getgoodnews.com.
I feel like in the pandemic, we had a bunch of those. You know, it's interesting, Avery, is I've been playing with an app, which is still in test mode called Butterflies, which is a social media app for AI. So it's AI agents talking to each other. And so all you do is create a personality and what you want it to do. And it starts posting. And then, you know, these AIs are getting more likes and comments than I do on any of my posts. But the thing that's really interesting to me is I can set a personality that says, oh, here's an innovation consultant who's going to speak at a conference because I happen to be going to speak at a conference next week. And I sort of set that as the personality of what I'm going to be doing. And it's generating all these posts of working on my presentation, hitting the airport, whatever. And then I'm like, yeah, and there's like now 75 comments and I'm reading and it's like there's back and forth dialogues between the AIs based on all the conversations that are happening in the thread. And it is the kind of thing where I could easily see how now the idea of when you see here's a Twitter post or here's a Facebook post or Instagram and it has 1,000 comments and 100,000 likes, you really got to wonder how many of these are truly legitimate because it is just so easy for these accounts to now be sort of utilizing these models to create real-ish conversation. So I'm just pretty worried about that myself.
I mean, I think this doesn't shock me too much because this has been like going on for a little bit. I think of the fact that like people are using these types of conversation simulators, but what they're doing is like very sort of like I mean, you think about all those like click farm scam things that are happening. You probably like, are we going golfing this weekend? And then you see these people falling for it. And I actually think that this specific term for them is called a pig butchering scam, if I'm not wrong. It's
not traumatic at all.
Yeah, not traumatic at all. I think it's translated from Chinese or something. But anyway, that type of thing has been going on for a while. What I think is the interesting part of that for good is this idea of being able to converse with virtual humans in a way that feels super personalized and feels very specific. Like if you're really into emerging technology, you could have a conversation with someone, I'm using air quotes, about that, or, you know, a hobby that you're really passionate about or something like that. The loneliness epidemic is super real. And this can be a way that people feel connected to others. Of course, it's arguably better to do that through real human connections and real people that, you know, don't always give you exactly what you want. But I think that we'll see that used. And we do already see this in platforms like Replica and whatnot.
Absolutely. The final thing I wanted to ask you in the last couple of minutes, Avery, is about the upfronts. This week is the upfronts here in New York. Big advertising hullabaloo. Everyone comes into town. Everyone starts spending money, trying to pitch their thing. And there's a lot of chatter this week about how the more exciting upfront presentations were all from the big tech companies.
Netflix killed it.
Netflix. This was Amazon's first upfront as well. And, you know, so in addition to be able to sort of bring out your celebrities and everyone likes to see the star power of that, you suddenly have platforms that have scale that is not able to be replicated on any mainstream media channel coming to the table, right? So now you're Amazon, now you're Netflix, now you're Apple, and you're able to say, we can get your advertiser message at such a large scale. I just wonder if, you know, you're worried at all about the kind of integration of big tech into entertainment in the way that we're seeing it. And does that, as someone who buys a lot of media, you know, at Vayner, do you guys think that that's a good thing, a bad thing? Are you just watching it? What's your take?
Yeah, I would say we don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think we just see the reality of the situation. And there's a really good piece this week by the Wall Street Journal and the article headline was titled, How TV Advertising Lost Its Relevance. And in the first paragraph, John Halverson, who's the SVP of Consumer Digital and Data for Mondelez International, the maker of Oreos and Sour Patch Kids and Ritz crackers and a number of other delicious snack brands, talked about how their company has shifted their US media spend in 3 years from 42% of that going to TV to 15% going to TV.
Wow.
And that's not based on his feelings or the fact that VaynerMedia, like social or anything like that, it's based on ROI that they see and ultimately like how effective those ads are. I think it's no surprise to anyone that TV has, it's just like there's always a new format, right? And like social has captured the hearts and minds of young people. TV, by the way, still works. And I think that's important to understand as well. Depending on your audience and depending on the group, it can be super effective. I know for some of our partners, the minute we go live with TV, we see sales immediately. And then some, it doesn't make as much of a difference. And some, it doesn't make a difference at all. So the upfronts presentation is a lot of salesmanship, showmanship. I'm not the person allocating on the media side anymore, so I barely get invited, but it was really cool to get to check out some of them. YouTube always does an outstanding job with brand cast. This year they had Billie Eilish, Lincoln Center. It was really impressive. And Todd Kaplan, the CMO of Pepsi, gave a really compelling presentation on how they use YouTube. But to me, like YouTube kind of just like is TV now. When you look at their device split and how a large percentage of YouTube consumption actually happens on TVs. So to me, the lines have blurred there. I personally haven't watched cable TV in like years. I think we have cable because it comes with my building, but I honestly wouldn't even know. And I think you also see a lot of these upstarts like the Tubies of the world. Of course, we had Melody on to talk a little bit about Tubi, but they're crushing it and growing with their sort of streaming service now too. There was a lot of hype around the big tech, Netflix and Amazon being two very big ones. Netflix did something very different with their upfronts that was more experiential. And I always like a distinctive asset. So I'm going to give the crown to Netflix for the upfronts.
There you go. I did hear a stat this morning that 10% of all television is being watched on YouTube right now, which I think just shows you exactly to your point that this stuff is all weaved in. And then you look at Google's ad engine, being able to look at that from a data perspective and then retarget those people on other platforms. It's pretty wild. All right, Avery, love hearing your takes on these things.
Love you too, Sam. I think that's where you're going with that.
Always, absolutely. But we're going to get to our guest, Evan Helda. Yes, Evan Helda is a big thinker, works at Amazon, focuses on spatial computing, and we wanted to have him on to tease us into the future of where this stuff is going, both from an Amazon perspective and also through he does a lot of writing, a lot of speaking on the topic. So we thought it'd be great to understand the future of spatial, the Oculus, the Apple Vision Pro, all the things 3D with Evan Helda right after the break. Safe is enabling ownership for all with smart accounts. With over 100 billion in total value stored across over 14 networks, Safe accounts are embedded everywhere, including DeFi Saver, WorldCoin, Dracula app, and more. Build and use the most battle-tested smart account in Ethereum. Visit safe.global. Consensus 2024. Global crypto regulation, the disruptive power of AI, the rise of tokenization. Consensus is the one event where experts convene to talk about the ideas shaping our digital future. Join developers, investors, founders, brands, policymakers, and plenty more in Austin, Texas from May 29th through the 31st. The 10th annual Consensus is curated by CoinDesk to feature the industry's most sought-after speakers and provide unparalleled networking opportunities and unforgettable experiences. Take 15% off registration with the code GENC15. Register now at consensus.coindesk.com, and I'll see you there. All right, everyone, we are here with Evan Helda. Evan is the principal specialist in spatial computing at AWS with Amazon. He's also the writer of the Medium Energy Substack, which is definitely a recommended read if you guys are really interested in all things metaverse, AI, and virtual worlds. Evan, in your background, you have a deep history in playing in sort of augmented, mixed virtual realities. And the last 4 years, you've been working in the spatial computing space at Amazon. So just to kick us off, what got you interested in working these alternate realities?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I've been a fan of your podcast for a while. I was listening way back when you guys first launched it. It was called something else, though, wasn't it? What was the original name of the podcast?
Always Gen
Always
C.
in Gen C, yeah.
Oh, always Gen C. Amazing. Well, yeah, I've been enjoying it. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, I've been really enticed by this idea of a digital layer on top of the real world for as long as I can remember, actually. I mean, when I was a kid, when I was 7, 8, 9, I was reading sci-fi books like Snow Crash, books from William Gibson. And it's just a thing it's lit up my inner child the most. And the thing that's been the most exciting for me is not so much this idea of alternate realities, but really more enhanced reality, our reality, so more augmented reality, spatial computing in that sense. And I just think it's the thing that's going to allow us to better communicate with each other, right? Bring our imaginations to life, An example I like to use is when I was a kid, I would play a game Oregon Trail with my sister, right? And we would actually build out, we would like set up chairs and we'd have a blanket and we build out our own little wagon and we'd imagine that we were on the Oregon Trail. But, what if we could enhance that with digital overlays? Like, what could that do to help us connect more deeply, understand the world more deeply, learn more deeply about certain things, about history, about space, about, the oceans, you name it. And so I'm just really excited about how it enhances and creates this more high density form of communication, higher bandwidth form of communication. And at a time where I think education is going to be what really allows humanity to kind of solve a lot of its biggest problems right now, I think spatial computing is going to be the answer. So that's kind of my North Star for it right now.
Wow, that's a big North Star to work towards. So let's go somewhere between, the future of humanity and you playing the Oregon Trail. Tell us a little bit about your career. We know you're at Amazon these days, but where have you stopped along in your career journey?
Yeah, the way it started, I would never have guessed I would end up here. I started off in finance, worked at John Hancock selling annuities and insurance and mutual funds, and my soul died a little bit at that time. I got lucky though and ended up having an opportunity to go join a tech startup where they were just 10 guys in a garage with the cool software. They needed some help selling it. I joined that company and worked for them for free because I had no background in technology or software. This is the CEO was like, you got to prove to us that you can actually be effective as a salesperson selling this stuff. And I did. And they brought me on right as the company was getting acquired. After that happened, that founder went to a really prominent augmented reality company called Meta. So yes, there was a Meta before the current Meta. So this is the OG Meta. And that was my first foray into AR and where I fell in love with this vision of bringing visual computing to life. And the vision there, what was really compelling was our CEO had this idea of an OS for the mind, right? Building an interface that didn't force us to conform to how computers are today, right? Which is this flat 2D abstraction of information, right? These symbols we have to learn, these different kind of unique tools that have a steep learning curve. He imagined an interface that conformed to how our brains already work and reason about the world in 3D and reason about the world spatially. And he imagined a world where, just like a baby can look at a paintbrush and pick it up and know intuitively that it can be used to, paint colors, we could have similar applications in virtual space where as intuitive as that. And so that's what grabbed me. And I still think we can build a really intuitive interface. And I think at a time when our machines are coming alive with AI, I think spatial computing is going to be the key interface to allow us to actually be more useful with AI and be a great companion to AI in return as it matures.
So, Evan, taking that thinking of your past,
Hmm.
and then you get to Amazon and you're in the spatial computing group. What is it that Amazon is interested in when it comes to sort of spatial and these kind of immersive worlds? Is it about how cloud systems are going to support them? Is it about how commerce is going to be coming to sort of fully immersible digital stores? Is it about the digital twinning of society and that every physical object will have a companion digital object? How do you see Amazon playing in that world?
Yeah. I think all the above captures our interest for sure. Segmenting it between AWS and Amazon, starting with AWS, what we sell today is compute, storage, networking, and databases. That's our bread and butter. And when you think about what it takes to render and process 3D content and 3D data, what it takes to store all this information, which is super vast, very heavy, dense data sets and files, what it takes to deliver this stuff and stream it out, right? It's the most intense version of any kind of workload you can imagine when you're simulating and processing XYZ data sets. And so we just think that it's going to be a massive revenue driver as a result of that. But we also think that 3D is very peculiar, right? There's very unique types of workflows around it to create 3D content. There's certain types of latency considerations when it comes to streaming. And so we think that there's a need to build at a middleware layer, right? So there's a need to go up the stack a little bit and think about some software tools have to exist above the raw infrastructure to automate 3D content creation, to lower the latency for 3D streaming and delivery, to make it really easy to take a 3D file and throw it into a machine learning algorithm to train a computer vision model to understand what the world is seeing and do that over and over and over again for an automotive maker that has thousands of parts in a factory. And not only do AR headsets have to see that thing and know what it is, but so do robots, right? Or so do drones that are flying around a dish control tower and they need to understand the space. So there's this idea of semantic understanding, which is a huge workflow and workload as well. So I think that's also a big thing we're really excited about is the convergence of spatial with AI. I think they're going to really reinforce each other. I think that AI is going to make spatial computing more accessible and spatial will make AI more understandable and usable. And there's a nice flywheel there that's really exciting for us. And so I think that's what we're really trying to go after right now. In terms of Amazon, I mean, it's the everything store, right? And I think this tech gives that everything store a come inside button. Now we can better understand products in 3D. We can have a more experiential shopping experience. Amazon is already creating maybe more 3D models than anyone in the world right now. Right? There is a whole team that's very manually helping all these different vendors out there create 3D models of products. But there's a huge bottleneck right now, right? A lot of these CPG or retail companies, they don't have a 3D file. And if they do, it's not in the right file format. It's not ready to be used. There's a massive amount of investment and work, manual work, to go and turn photos or CAD models into 3D models. And so once there are some unlocks there to do that with AI and really automate that, I think you're going to see everything in the everything store be 3D and everything be experiential. And then you think about also our internal processes, right? We have one of the largest real estate footprints in the world with our Amazon fulfillment centers. And there's insane amounts of automation that has to go into those, insane amounts of training for the robots has to go into those. And a lot of that stuff can be done automated and planned and predicted in virtual worlds and simulations first before it's implemented in these centers. And so that's going to really help unlock scale and speed of delivery and everything else. So it touches the whole business. And I think it's going to be pretty transformational for us.
Wow, that was a lot. Evan, you went like into the real estate footprint, the everything store.
Touches everything.
Can you help us understand just the simplified version of spatial computing and why a company like Amazon is so interested in this? Because you just talked a lot about Amazon's ambitions in this space and a lot about the work that kind of goes into some of the tactical stuff. But why is Amazon interested in this future of spatial computing, just like broadly at a macro level?
Yeah, absolutely. So spatial computing often gets mixed up with augmented reality and virtual reality and headsets. And that's one component of it. That's one interface for it. We like to think about it from more of the data perspective. And so we like to talk about the idea of spatial data. What is that? It's really world data. It's data about people, places, and things. It's data that has, like I said before, an XYZ coordinate. And so to think about it simply, spatial computing is any system that is either rendering, simulating, or understanding space, virtual or physical space. And so that isn't just headsets, that's also autonomous cars. It's also drones and robots, right? The tech stack, the computer vision technology, the simulation technology, the rendering technology that is used to either power or train or visualize within any of those contexts is all the same tech stack. So it's all spatial computing. And so a good example, people think that Tesla is a AI company. They think that it's automotive company principally. It's really a spatial computing company. And the reason why I think AI is a kind of a subsidiary of that is that spatial computing involves reasoning about the world, which is an AI thing, and AI is an input to that spatial reasoning. So I'm not sure if that's the Eli 5, explain like I'm 5 answer, but I think the way to like put a headline on that is like any compute process that can understand XYZ space in the real world in some kind of way or virtual worlds.
I'm still TBD if Sterling would understand that, but thank you for breaking it down a little bit.
Well,
a little bit for
he's
us.
4, so I can think of an Eli 4 answer next.
All right, Evan. So I think we all got a sort of big dose of the idea and the concept around spatial computing with the Apple Vision Pro. I know that you've written about it quite a bit on your Substack as well. I want to share this chart with you that I would love to sort of get your commentary on. So this is a chart here that I pulled yesterday, Google Trends. And so we have the Apple Vision Pro, we have the iPhone. Then I also added in for some control, we have Bitcoin, and when we have Kendrick Lamar, because he's been in the news. So when we look at this chart, it's like Apple Vision Pro doesn't even chart compared to any of these other things. And this is 3 months, if that, from the launch of the device. I, again, compared it to another Apple device in the iPhone just to see, like, these are the same company making the same thing. When I pulled the Oculus, the MetaQuest 3, also similar results to the Apple Vision Pro. So I think the question I would have for you as someone who is in the spatial computing business and looks at this as probably being a big moment, why do we think it's still having a hard time catching on with the mainstream audience? Is it a form factor thing, or is it a software thing, or is it really just this is exactly where we're supposed to be on the timeline?
I think it's exactly where we're supposed to be on the timeline. I mean, it was never Apple's strategy to try and win over the mainstream consumer with this device. It's just obvious, right? The form factor is too big, the price is too high, and they're not even really trying to follow up the device with like all kinds of consumer content because they know it's a futile effort. They're only selling a few 100,000 of these things, they might get to 1 million. And it's just important to keep in mind that their strategy with this headset is, on one hand, to seed the market, right? To give it to developers. It's a fancy dev kit in many ways, but primarily it's their goal is to really try to inspire and build more mainstream awareness, not mainstream adoption, right? Because of the fact that it's such a magical experience. There's a quote that Palmer Luckey had back in 2016 that I love. He said that before AR, VR can be something that everyone can afford, it must become something that everyone wants. So Apple's strategy was to create something that's desirable from a user experience perspective. And I'm not sure if you guys have tried it yet, but I've been in the space for a long time. This is the first device where I put it on someone, and every single reaction is something along the lines of just complete awe, complete wonder, complete surprise and shock. It's holy shit. It's WTF. It's oh my God. I have this whole compilation video that I put online of like 50 plus demos I've given, and it's pretty hilarious to see the genuine shock from people. And I think that's a big leap because I mean, I was putting people on the Quest 2, even the Quest 3, and people it's impressive, but no one takes it off with like their eyes bug-eyed, like holy cow. And so I think that's one thing to consider. I think the other thing to consider is what is missing. And the big unlock for all this technology is going to be more seamless forms of collaboration, right? This device is very much a single player device, and that's, people want to connect, people want to bring it out, and I bring it out with my friends and family, and I have to switch into guest mode, and then they put it on and I don't really know what they're seeing. And until Apple can really make a seamless local and like virtual or remote collaboration experience, it's going to struggle. Now, that in terms of remote collaboration, they've had some big unlocks recently. I had my first ever moment in the headset where I was like, okay, this is now coming. It's really happening in this regard. Where I put it on, they have the new avatars now that are much more realistic. They have hands. It tracks your face a little bit more accurately. You don't look quite as warped. It's still a little bit uncanny valley, but it's a lot better. And the way it works with like FaceTime and phone calls, within a minute, I was recently jumping into an experience with a buddy. We were playing a board game. So we had a board game going over here. We had a friend dialed in with his avatar who I haven't seen in like 7 years. And we were just catching up in this amazing digitally native way. And one friend was pulling up his spatial video captures of his kid. And they were over here playing in an immersive way. I felt like I was there meeting his kid, even though I've never met the kid. And then we're playing this board game and we're just catching up. And it was, one guy's in Puerto Rico, one guy's in Portland. I have goosebumps thinking about it. It was really amazing. And it was really good, even though it wasn't, if that makes sense. Like this is as bad as it's ever going to be, which is a common phrase you're hearing with lots of technology right now. And it was still super compelling. So that's coming. That's going to get a lot better in the next year or two. The last thing to talk about that's going to be interesting to watch is local collaboration. It's not easy at all to get multiple devices to synchronize the same shared scan or map of a physical place, right? And then to easily synchronize those and then put content in that corner of the room where my headset sees it in the same place that your headset sees it. And to make that synchronization happen in a really smooth way. And Apple's bar for UI UX, as everyone knows, is wildly high. And so it's an incredibly difficult tech problem, incredibly difficult UI UX problem to do that synchronization and do that mapping of a space across devices and put that thing in the same place. And so I think they're working on that. I think once they figure that out and we can all get in a room together and have that shared magical moment, that's when it's going to really go. And then you combine that with the lower price point, I think V2 and V3 is going to be a whole different story.
Okay, so it sounds like you have an AVP. Please confirm.
Right there. There she is. This is my little spatial computing dojo, by the way. That's the Meta 2 headset, a relic, and the Magic Leap 2 is over there as well. So I got the full lineup here.
You've got the whole package of all the different devices, and I'm sure you have favorites. But more broadly, Evan, if we think about sort of the history, and I'm sure we're going to look back at these and they'll go in some computer museum and your kids are going to say like, oh my God, I can't believe that was the headset they used. But if I've read you writing a little bit on how the metaverse needs to be defended. You are clearly a proponent of sort of this digital first reality. What is it being defended against?
Oh, yes, this is my holy mission. I think it's being defended against primarily a lot of the Black Mirror-induced dystopian fears that exist, right? People don't love the idea of going into a virtual world as well, right? So that makes sense. Like you can't knock people for the idea of like, oh, I don't want to digitize myself and be an avatar and disappear. Like I like reality. And so I think what has to happen is some kind of redefining of what the metaverse is and why it matters and where we are in this point in time. And so the way that I'd like to do that is people who are scared of the dystopia, what I say is, I think you need to rethink that a little bit, because what if we're in the dystopia now, right? And then the way to think about that is think about the way that tech currently works and how we behave. We're already living in a sort of half-baked metaverse. We're already dating in virtual spaces. We're shopping in virtual spaces. We're meeting. We're doing this podcast here in a virtual space. Sometimes kids are going to class in virtual. We're doing all these things in these virtual ways, but they leave so much to be desired, right? They're not very humanizing. And I think that's leading to lots of different problems that we're seeing arise with the internet, right? Problems with, kids having anxiety and depression, breakdown in understanding and empathy and communication when we're trying to communicate and connect in a very constrained, limiting way. And so the way I like to think about it in the inverse is, okay, we need to punch out of this sort of no man's land, this sort of gray area that we're in that's keeping us sort of stuck. And I think there are ways to use the technology to create a more personified version of the internet, right? That more reflects the way that the physical world works. And the way that I like to think about that is then starting to talk about some of the enhancements that occur from this, right? I talked earlier about this idea of increased bandwidth of information that comes in, better communication. There's a quote that I love from Terence McKenna. You all know Terence McKenna. He was this kind of mystic, psychedelic guru of sorts that had
Of
incredible
course.
prescient views of technology, right? And he has this quote where he talks, I'm paraphrasing, but he talks about, imagine if we could actually see what people meant when they spoke, right? If we got this kind of form of telepathy, what kind of impact would that have on the world? And then he sort of creates this interesting view of what language is today. He talks about how language is really just these small mouth noises, right? That kind of move through space, these acoustical signals. And these signals require this consulting of a learned dictionary, is what he says. And it's like not a very wideband form of communication. But with AR, VR, we could have this more, true mirror of the mind and a form of telepathy that could dissolve boundaries, what he says. It could dissolve disagreement, dissolve conflict, dissolve a lack of empathy. That's a pretty powerful idea, right? Especially at a time where there's so much contention around how to solve some of these big problems. And no one really has many answers. There's not many solutions to solve them right now. But the most upstream thing we could do to solve them is probably create better communication and collaboration, which will lead to better problem solving and then allow us to find those solutions, be it climate change, be it regulation, how to deal with AI, be it how to deal with robots and population and all these different things that are starting to arise. And then I also help people understand like, hey, AI is very real. It's very here. And it's going to become this amazing companion. I hinted this earlier. Like, how do we really become a good companion to AI in return? Right? It's going to produce all these incredible insights for us. It's going to solve some of the world's biggest mysteries about space and the oceans and mining asteroids and like all these things that we just can't really grasp. And we don't want to get answers about that stuff in the text box. Our answer back to the AI is going to be, don't tell me, show me. And so now that we can actually go experience these things AI is going to produce in these really powerful ways, it's going to allow us to have this much more symbiotic relationship with AI that's super important. And then the last thing I try to always tell people is, and this is a bit more concrete and they can really relate to, those same people like to complain about their kids being stuck inside, playing video games all the time. And they project out from that idea of, oh, our kids are just locked into this box. But that box is tethered to a wall, plugged into a screen, and they're stuck inside because of that form factor. But now with AR, they can go have these amazing experiences, connect with their friends in wonderful ways, go on these amazing treasure hunts, go build forts in the woods, go out into the world and maybe even have an argument with someone and like develop these real world skill sets, like making contact with the physical world that a lot of older generations long for. That can now become a thing again, right? We can go scrape our knees out there in the world and we can build forts or these virtual labyrinths, and there's these figments of our imagination don't have to be just figments. They can become a bit more real, which I think is going to be a really amazing thing for just giving kids confidence, helping them learn, helping them connect. And I think it's thinking about these kids and what kids can get from this, to me, is one of the more exciting things about this technology.
I want to look at what you said and parse it into two different groups, because I think that it's very easy to make the case, and I agree with you 100%, that augmented locative experiences that are just sort of happening in the world around us that make the world more interesting and better is a really easy way to defend the metaverse. I think about the first part of what you said and the idea of needing our metaverse virtual spaces to become more real in order to connect the dots for people on how we can connect better. But also, you mentioned there's Zoom, there's Hinge, there's all the different Venmo, all the different things that we're doing digitally, which are in essence metaverses of themselves or pieces of. And I think when we look at technology, so much of technology's growth has happened because it connects us more, it's efficient, and it sort of solves a problem. And the real world has problems, but it's a pretty immersive experience that's going to be hard to replicate. So my thinking around this is some of the reasons that video games are so special for kids and adults is because it brings you to a different reality. It brings you into a different type of experience. And I think one of the challenges that I feel like we have is one, that we don't look at Zoom and we don't look at Hinge, or we don't look at Fortnite as being a metaverse, even though they're all pieces of these virtual experiences. But I also think, like, just getting back to, when I have to defend to relatives Bitcoin, part of the idea, like, I then ask them, how much cash are you carrying? And almost no one carries cash anymore, right? Because we're very comfortable working in digital currency, and we don't need that digital currency to look like dollar bills, nor do we need it to look like coins. We need it to be convenient, where I can send Avery $20 because she paid for dinner when we went out, and it just happens. But we're not needing to replicate a cash-like experience there. So I guess what I wonder is the opportunity to say all of the things that we do in life, there are things that should be in physical space because we're all still existing in physical space. And the things that should be happening in these mixed realities are about augmentation and additive layers. And that could be additive for fun. It could be additive for experience. It could be additive for connectivity. But do we fool ourselves? And again, this is me asking you to defend the metaverse again. But do we fool ourselves in saying that we need to put on a headset to see the world around us when the world is actually around us?
No, not at all. Yeah, I don't think that creating a one-to-one digital twin, like at the highest fidelity possible of the real world, makes much sense at all. To your point, I think it's always going to be use case driven and depending upon context, like what you're doing, who you're with, where you are. And I mean, like in terms of thinking about the examples you gave of like Hinge or Zoom, it's just a matter of that last mile improvement of you here in 3D, and it feels like we're together. It's not creating a reconstruction of the real world. It's just making this experience a little bit better. Right. Or if I'm on a date, I can have that first call with somebody in that similar way. It's a little bit better. Maybe not. Maybe now I'm not going to go waste my time on some first date if we don't have that chemistry in that same way we would have realized that in that physical connection. And then, example I've been using a lot about the inverse of all this is that there's an essay I wrote recently about the ultimate promise of spatial computing. And that ultimate promise I talked about was this idea of hacking our inner technology. Our inner technology being the kind of physiology and the neurochemistry that produces things that put us into flow, or things that produce feelings like awe and wonder and curiosity, right? And some of those things, to produce those feelings, requires complete newness, complete things that we'll never ever experience here, like blasting off into the cosmos, right? Or staring out over a mountain range when we're locked into New York City. And one of the things that Trip, the CEO of Trip, told me about was, a lot of their users are going into VR chat. And one of the use cases is like these sort of social groups and meetups. And there's this one like PTSD focused meetup. And someone showed up to this PTSD support group virtually as a stick of butter. And being a stick of butter allowed them to open up and just be light and more playful, more malleable, and show up into that experience in a way that they needed to not be rigid and stuck in their old patterns and ways of thinking. And then they were able to open up and be healed. So it's just a great example of like something that you can never do in the real world. It's so powerful in the virtual world, but it has purpose, right? It has meaning to it. It's thoughtful. It's not just virtual worlds and avatars for virtual worlds and avatars' sake. And I think as long as that's a principle in the development of these worlds and these experiences, right? It's not virtual worlds and avatars for the sake of it, but there's like a meaning behind it. And it's tied to kind of what makes us tick in some kind of way, and it activates that in some kind of way. I think that's the line we have to walk to make sure these worlds are humanized and real, and real in a way like impactful real,
I love it. I too would like to show up as a stick of butter in many contexts.
Maybe a consensus, Avery.
Yes,
Yes.
I'll wear my better costume. I'll melt in the Austin heat. So Evan, just kind of bringing us home here. When it comes to sort of spatial computing, mixed reality, robotics, et cetera, you've talked a lot during this podcast around, what you believe the future will hold. What specific technology are you most looking forward to as you gaze into your crystal ball in the next 10 years?
I'm really excited what we're seeing out of technology like Sora and Gen AI for video. And then there's a full value chain around this, right? So these like Sora, just through 2D video, it learns and understands about the world in 3D. and it learns, understands physics. And so that becomes a sort of mechanism for spatial computing type of use cases. And there's companies like there's a startup called Luma out there that's really fascinating. They've already built some text to 3D type of technology. So, type in, I want a green chair with gold trim, and it pops it out. But then they also have technology to do, it's called Gaussian splatting, or G-splat. Gaussian splatting is like an extension of what you've maybe heard of called NERF, which is an evolution of photogrammetry. And it's basically, to put it super simply, it's just taking very, very, very limited 2D inputs and producing 3D scenes from those inputs and using machine learning and AI to do that, based upon just pixels and points of light and understanding where those are projecting out to then to be 3D in some kind of way. And so like with Luma, you can take a Sora video, run it through a G-splat, and now that video becomes a full virtual 3D scene to navigate through like an Unreal game engine or Unity game engine. And so if you want to get really out there and trippy for a second, like whether it's taking our memories, pictures, old videos, old photos, throwing them through a G-splat and reliving those memories in some kind of way, or just what that's going to allow us to do to create the most fantastical, wild, trippy, psychedelic future worlds to go play games in and discover in and explore in, it's going to be pretty wild. So that's one thing, is that kind of, we'll call it, 2D plus G-splat plus 3D output, what that can yield. I think the other big thing I'm really excited about is just a convergence of these three big things I focus on over at my newsletter and podcast. And that is the convergence of spatial and AI and crypto into one tech stack, right? And so like just one example of that is the ability for people to now create all kinds of art. Maybe it's made in partnership with AI, right? It could be of some kind of experience or scene, and then ways for them to monetize that and like encapsulate that virtual thing as an NFT, and then monetize it in all kinds of ways and let it be used in all kinds of different experiences across different types of movies and games and scenes. And as a whole market is going to open up for 3D creators to populate virtual experiences and worlds. And that's the biggest thing we're going to need. We just need limitless amounts of spatial 3D content. And that idea of creators creating that content, letting it get distributed on a marketplace, tracked via NFTs is, I think, super exciting. And I wrote another essay called 2042 Day in a Web3 Life. And it's this sort of sci-fi narrative where you are a creator and you are part of this DAO of creators that is contracted by a Meow Wolf DAO. Have you guys heard of Meow Wolf? You guys been to Meow Wolf before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Meow Wolf's kind of like,
Of course.
it's like it's like Disneyland meets like psychedelic art gallery meets like interactive museum, right? And so in this world, like how Meow Wolf is thinking about digitizing that experience, and this idea of them contracting out to these like sub DAOs that can create this content and then get paid for it and track it. I think that's just a super exciting space. And I think that's going to probably be mature in about 10, 15 years, but if not sooner, but that's something that I want to partake in when it's real.
I feel like there's a lot of microdosing in my future to live in the world that Evan is portraying. So I'm excited for that.
It's a very apt comment.
Well, I mean, the thing that I think is really exciting about the site, and then back to that essay I wrote about Trip, the idea there is spatial computing is going to allow us to microdose moments of awe and wonder and flow, like microdosing flow, and just putting on a headset, getting into get a workspace that just narrows your focus immediately and blocks out the world. I think our ability to do that is going to lead to more productivity, more mindfulness, more emotional well-being. And so, yeah, I think it's probably a pretty good way to put a bow on the conversation with that idea.
And I will say, Evan, I mean, I think you and I both went to the Trip experience in South by Southwest. Avery, I don't know if you made it to that, but it felt like you were microdosing, watching two people with virtual reality headsets in the middle of a sound meditation, playing imaginary drums for an audience while there was also a real-time meditation happening. And it felt very surreal for that very reason. Evan, thanks for spending so much time with us today. We really appreciate your insights. We're looking forward to seeing you at Consensus this year. One of your crushes, Neil Stevenson, will be there, so we'll have to make sure you get in the room together.
Really?
So you can vibe out together
amazing.
on this concept. Yes, absolutely. Just thanks for sharing your insights. And we're looking forward to seeing what you guys are building over at Amazon as well.
Yeah, pleasure to be on here, guys. Look forward to seeing you in person and talk soon.
Thanks, Evan. I feel like Evan is truly a pioneer of the future, but I still have no idea what his day-to-day job at Amazon is. Sam, what was your takeaway from that convo?
Kind of the same. I think it feels like Evan is living in a slightly alternate reality to us, which I love that some people do, because I barely can keep reality together. So the idea of living so much of my time in virtual spaces feels challenging. I will also say, when you asked the question about his predictive technologies for 10 years ago, it wasn't lost on me that the way he described this text to environment to then 3D room that you can now spend time in, all are going to need places to host that 3D data. And AWS just happens to have
Sponsored
products that do
by
this.
Amazon Web Services.
Exactly. So he also thinks within his lane, which is great. So, his essays are always really deep and interesting, and I understand about half of them, but I do enjoy him and his perspective.
I completely agree. Deep, and I'm still processing how this all sort of comes together in the practicality of the now. But there
Mm-hmm.
are so many interesting, like adjacent technologies that have been sort of talked through that I think are fascinating for a lot of our listeners, especially because like this is something that Amazon is investing in tremendously. I know I quickly mentioned
Mm-hmm.
this, but I went to a talk this week for a new book that just came out called The Everything War, which is of course a
Mm-hmm.
play on the Everything Store. And it was written by a journalist who talked a lot about some of like the business practices of Amazon that I find quite eye-opening. You're nodding like you kind of know what it is, but it was
Yes.
definitely, again, one woman's point of view, but based on many sources that I think were really, really interesting. And, I think this is another example of Amazon playing the super long game with investing in these sort of what now seem as heady technologies of that so far in the future. But when we look back, it'll be like, oh, well, they really built a moat, which is one of Jeff Bezos's favorite things to do.
I actually listened to a story from the Wall Street Journal, I think, about this same book that you're talking about. And it is interesting to me that in the current conversation about big tech, we hear a lot about Microsoft, a lot about Apple, a lot about Google, a lot about TikTok. But Amazon kind of keeps being just under the radar for a lot of it, not realizing that they also service so many of the companies out there and have the deep logistics knowledge digitally and physically in order to pay off a lot of the visions of what people are making. So I never count Amazon out. I think they're so impressive to what they do and ruthless in how they do it, which is always part of what I think makes them always, sort of rise to the top. All right, Avery, I think it's time to wrap it up. Another great episode in the can. Thank you so much, Gen C. We will see you in the next time.
See you next week, Gen C.